Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, musician Cathy Rich joins the show. At the age of 12, she recorded The Beat Goes On, which has been heard in many commercials and movies. A few years later, she became a model and worked with Wilhelmina. As an adult, she worked on preserving her father's legacy and has worked with the likes of Phil Collins and the late Neal Peart. Speaking of her father, it's none other than jazz drummer Buddy Rich, who was one of the most influential drummers of all time, who performed with the likes of Tommy Dorsey, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and Frank Sinatra. Cathy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Things are good. I'm in Chicago and we're waiting for summer. That's all I can say.
I love Chicago. It's one of my favorite places to be.
Really? It's a fantastic place.
In Chicago, there's no better place to walk around and be like, I want pizza. Well, you can go around the corner and find any slice of pizza you want.
Absolutely. Chicago pizza is way different than New York pizza. I grew up in New York, so I kind of am partial to New York pizza, but Chicago definitely has a good pizza game.
It's very different because you're going from the bigger slice, let's say that's much thinner, to basically eating a pie.
Pretty much. Deep dish pizza is a whole other world.
It is. And if you have four people to share it with, it makes it a little bit easier to try to get through.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been known to make my way through a couple of slices of deep dish on several occasions, so it's always fun to do it.
Is there a place in Chicago that when you're craving deep dish, you like?
Yes, there's two. There's Giordano's, which is fantastic, but then there's Lou Malnati's, which is probably the fan favorite. It's superior.
Which is ironic because the Giordano's I like at Rush near Superior.
Well, there you go. Giordano's is great. There's one in my neighborhood. We usually go there on special occasions.
Years ago, as a thank you, a friend of mine actually dry iced me a Giordano's pizza, and that was a good day for me.
Oh, that's a good day. I sometimes bring Lou Malnati's to friends and family, frozen Lou Malnati's. I take it on the plane and bring it to wherever I'm going, and they're very happy.
Well, if you ever come to Dallas, please bring one for me.
You know I will.
So, how did you first get into music, and were you ever, I guess, pushed into doing it, or was it of your own choosing?
I was born into it, so it's a thing that sort of just happened upon my birth. And music was always in the house, always playing. Never was I pushed into anything that I didn't want to do, but I was always singing. From as far back as I can remember, I was singing soundtracks, I was singing whatever there was. I went to a lot of Broadway when I was a little kid, and that kind of started me off. But school is where I really started thinking about singing, was singing in chorus and honor chorus. So by the time I was 12 years old, I was ready.
Who on Broadway did you like to see as a young child?
The first Broadway show that I ever saw was Bye Bye Birdie. And I think I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I was mesmerized. And I'm like, how are all these people doing all of this at one time and this incredible music? And from there, it was West Side Story and Camelot and all of it. So today, I'm still a theater geek. I love it.
When you go to the theater, whether New York, Chicago, wherever you are, is there a
Yeah.
particular type of show you like to see?
Well, I'm a musical theater geek, so I like music. So I was brought up on Jesus Christ Superstar and Hair, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. When I first heard the music of Jesus Christ Superstar, that was pretty much it for me.
As far as individual musicians and singers go, who are some of your idols?
I grew up with the greatest of the great. People in my home from Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. and the greatest of the great jazz artists. So Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, who was obviously the greatest, Sarah Vaughan, Mel Torme, those were the people that I grew up listening to. Frank Sinatra, of course. So in my early years, my ears were attuned to hearing the best of the best. Then when I got older, I wanted to listen to Robert Plant. I wanted to listen to Three Dog Night, and I wanted to listen to Phil Collins. I loved Linda Ronstadt, Stevie Nicks. So my musical taste spans every genre.
Growing up, You said that Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. came to the house. As a kid, what's it like to have those people walk in?
As a kid, you really don't know what's going on. These are family friends. So it wasn't unusual for Jerry Lewis to walk in the door, or Frank, or Sammy, or Tony. I mean, these were just friends of the family. So to me, it didn't seem that unusual until I got to be sort of a little bit older. And when I would tell kids at school that so and so was coming over, first they thought I was lying. And then, second of all, they thought I was delusional, but it was true. So it didn't seem that unusual then. It seems very unusual now.
Growing up, my dad didn't have the same friends that your dad had.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that normal to have that going on. But my dad came up in an era where he was with Charlie Parker and he was with Miles Davis. And when you spout these names, it seems like you're making it up. But it's really the truth of who he came up with than who I came up with. So I got a real big view of the world and the world of music at a very young age.
I'm curious that Sinatra was there because I've read, and this may not be true, that Sinatra and your dad didn't have the greatest of relationship.
They were both on the Tommy Dorsey band when they were kids. I mean, I think Buddy was 19 or 20 when he was on Tommy's band. And then Frank joined and they butted heads because each one of them were vying to be the star of the band. And each one of them thought they were the star of the band. And then they were roommates and did not get along well at all because both had fairly good sized egos. They had some fights, they had some spats, but later on, they were best friends until the day my father was no longer here. I mean, Frank Sinatra, he gets a lot of bad mouthing in the press, but when he was your friend, he was your friend for life and would do anything for you, absolutely anything. And there's very few people that you can say that about. Had your back no matter what. So he was a great man.
Is there a story that you could tell about Frank away from the music scene that would make people understand just how good of a friend Frank was?
There's many of them, but the one that comes to mind as I'm sitting here is my father was recovering from quadruple bypass surgery. And we had a home in Palm Springs, which was right next to Frank's house in Palm Springs. So every day, literally every single day, he would come while my dad was recuperating and they would walk because you have to walk, I guess, after bypass surgery for your heart to start pumping again properly. So you have to walk 1 or 2 miles a day. And Frank would come every day and walk the 2 miles with him, fly him to LA on his jet for doctor's appointments, bring him home. And then one of the nights when it was actually raining in Southern California, I was there with my dad and the doorbell rang and I went to the door and it was Frank standing there. And he's got an umbrella in one hand, he's got a loaf of bread under his one arm, and he's holding a pot. So he's like, "Where's the kitchen?" He comes in, he goes to the kitchen, and he asks if my dad can have spaghetti. And I'm like, "Yeah, of course he can have spaghetti." So he stands in the kitchen, and this is one of those moments that there are several of them in my life where I just remember thinking to myself, take this in because this doesn't happen every day, that Frank Sinatra is standing in your kitchen cooking pasta. So I sat on the counter, he was cooking, we were just chatting because I've known him since the day I was born. And he makes a tray and he goes into the room where my dad is, brings the tray of food in, and they sit on the bed and just reminisce for the next 5 hours. Now, that is highly unusual, but it was one of those moments in time where you just think, that's so special, and really take in every second of it because it's extraordinary.
That is just amazing. I am very rarely speechless, but I am speechless right now.
It's a good one. But he was that guy. He was just really cool that way, where if he loved you unconditionally and showed up for you. And that's really rare.
You mentioned you just kind of sit back and take the moment in. What's another one that you have that you just kind of took in throughout your life and said, is this really happening?
I got to experience that actually quite a bit. But my dad did a tour of Europe with Sammy Davis Jr. And this stands out just because as a performer, as a singer, as a dancer, he was sort of everything, Sammy, and a wonderful person that I really got to know extremely well. And I would sit with him in his dressing room every night. Before the show, he would sit in his dressing room and put on his makeup. And I would sit on the floor and we would just chat. And that alone is unusual because I was friendly with a lot of my father's friends. So I don't know if I seemed older for my age. I was probably a teenager at the time, and they just enjoyed talking to me. So in that regard, that was another one of those moments every night with Sammy before he went on, just sitting in his dressing room and chatting about my day or whatever, and then going and watching the spectacular performance. And then that has to do something for you as an artist. That really does make you want to up your game because you're seeing, again, one of the world's greatest performers.
Did you ever get a chance to perform with Sammy or Frank or Ella or any of those?
Unfortunately, no. But to me, at that point in my life, that just seemed like something that would be just way out of my thought process. I would never have even thought about doing something like that. But luckily, I did get to perform with my dad a lot from the time I was 12 until he left. And so I was really fortunate to be able to just do that and have that training ground.
Speaking of performing with your dad, I heard a story that you and your dad going to go tape an album and it was a little bit different than you thought.
Yes, which was the first time I ever sang in front of an audience, per se. I've sung in front of school projects and things like that, but never in front of a crowd. So when he asked me to record The Beat Goes On, he picked me up from school one day and that was on the radio and I was singing along to it. And he said, you should really come and record that. We're doing a record in LA in a couple of weeks. I'll get a chart written and come and do it. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Not realizing what I was getting myself into. So 2 weeks pass, we go to Los Angeles and we pull into the parking lot of a nightclub. So I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe he's picking something up or dropping something off. And he's like, well, let's go. I said, what do you mean? He said, this is where we're doing it. And I said, I thought we were recording. He said, we are recording. I said, I thought we were going to a studio. Like, no. I said, wait, you want me to sing this live in front of people? He's like, yeah, we're doing a live album. I was like, absolutely not. No way. There's not a chance I'm going to do this. And gave me the pep talk. We go in. The place is absolutely jam-packed full of people. And I run into the dressing room and I'm like so out of my mind with nerves that there was no way I was going to be able to do this. As a first timer, and then you're getting me up to sing on a live album where you get one shot at it in front of all these people. Don't worry about it. You'll be great. I was like, no, I can't do it. So when we walk into the club, the first person I see sitting in the very front, right where the microphone where I'll be singing, is Judy Garland. So now there really is no way I'm doing this. So he went out and was talking to Judy because they were great friends. And she's like, send Cathy out here. I want to talk to her. So I go out and I sit with her and she gave me this incredible pep talk, which the gist of it was never be intimidated by anybody. You get up, you do what you do, and that's it. So I was like, okay, if she's telling me this, it must be real. So that was it. And the cut that you hear on that album is the only take that we did that night. That was it.
Yeah, no pressure there at all.
At 12 years old, it was pretty daunting.
I can only imagine, especially with the fact of how well known your father was. Judy Garland's there.
It was nuts. It was just really, again, one of those moments where you're like, okay, take a deep breath, take this all in, because this doesn't really happen a lot. So at 12, I got my feet wet with recording live. Pretty insane.
As the kids would say today, I guess that's the definition of go big or go home.
That was it. You had no choice. And I think the lessons that I learned from my dad were vast. I mean, I learned so much from him and just watching how he did things and how he ran his life and how professional he was with things and not making excuses. If this is what you want to do with your life, And at that point, at 12, you don't really know what you want to do with your life. I knew that I loved singing. So I've been fortunate enough in my life that I've done that my whole life. I've been a singer since I was 12 years old, professionally. You just learn things, and that was a really great lesson for me. It was just, don't make excuses. You're nervous. Everybody's nervous. Get up and just do it.
What did that teach you also, especially looking back now with a bit of hindsight, about taking a risk and knowing it's okay that even if it doesn't work out, at least you did it?
Well, that's it. So many people are fearful of what's ahead. If you don't face the fear and walk through it, then you're left with regret that you never did it. So I am the mind of, if I'm afraid of it, I'm going to do it, just because I don't like to be afraid of things. So I'm afraid of heights. Will I go on the world's highest Ferris wheel? Absolutely. Will I be terrified at the time? Absolutely. But did I do it? Yes. Will I do it again? Probably. So I'm just like, you have to just face fear and do it. And I would have been really disappointed in myself, even at 12 years old, if I hadn't done that.
Speaking of being a little afraid of heights, I went paragliding, and at some point I'm going to go do it again, I think.
Oh, wow. Do you have a fear of heights, or do you just wanted to do it?
I have a little bit of a fear of heights. Actually, not really the fear of heights, it's the fear of falling from heights.
That's pretty much it.
I wanted to do it because I thought it would be fun. And to be perfectly honest, a former work colleague of mine bet me some money that I wouldn't do it, and never tempt me like that.
When there's money involved, always do it. That's what I say. So yeah, I mean, that's really a good life lesson, is facing your fears and walking through them, because it's never, ever as bad as you think it's going to be.
Speaking of facing fears and taking risks, was there anybody that you've collaborated with in your music career that you were like, maybe I'm not sure I want to do this, and it turned out well?
Good question. I'm trying to think. I don't usually go into things like that. If it's something that is absolutely so outrageous, I would just say no. But when we did the Burning for Buddy albums with Neal Peart and I co-producing, that was an interesting time, because I wasn't sure of how that was all going to go down, but it ended up turning out better than we both thought it was going to. So we had 22 drummers in 2 weeks recording at the power station in New York. And that was an interesting time, because there were people that were better than I expected, that were guest artists, and there were people that were not as good as I expected. And I was a little trepidatious about it in the very beginning, because I just wasn't sure. But once we got in the studio and did it, again, better than I expected.
For me, I am a huge Rush fan. So when I read that and then started to go listen to some of the songs, I was like, how great is this?
Neal and I had a really close, tight relationship from pretty much the moment we met. And how we met was interesting, because he had never done anything outside of Rush. And I had written to him about coming and doing one of my Buddy Rich memorial concerts, which, if your listeners don't know, you should Google them, YouTube them, because we've had the greatest drummers in the world sitting in with Buddy's band playing Buddy's music. And when we were thinking of people for the next show, the name that kept popping up was Neal. And I was not a Rush fan. I really didn't know anything about Rush. And people were saying, oh, you'll never get him. You'll never get him. He'll never do it. He doesn't do anything outside of Rush. He's never done anything. And so all that does is make me that more anxious to get him. So all I did was write him a letter. And I guess the letter hit him in a spot, and he said yes. And the rest was history. We literally became joined at the hip from that moment on. I like a good challenge, because I always want to prove people wrong. So I proved everybody wrong when Neal said yes, and then came and did the concert. And then we ended up doing Burning for Buddy together. Then he did another memorial concert for me. And then we just kind of kept it going over the years, and just really one of my closest friends and a great person.
Speaking of Burning for Buddy, it was nominated for a couple of Grammys. What was it like just to get the honor of the nomination?
Anytime you're recognized for your work, it's miraculous to me. I think that because it was so close to my heart, and anything that I do in my dad's name is always something that is close to me. So any kind of recognition that you get from your peers is fantastic. What can I say? It's an honor.
Was there a drummer aside from Neal that you weren't sure that could do your dad's music that proved you completely wrong?
Well, I will tell you that there is somebody that I really wanted to do it, and Neal wasn't so sure. And so we kind of went back and forth on him for a while. And I was like, no, I know he can do it. I know he can do it. And Neal was like, I don't think he can do it. And I was like, I know he can do it. So he came in and he proved everybody wrong. And that is Matt Sorum, who was at that time the drummer for Guns N' Roses. And Matty came in, he nailed it in 2 takes and was just so prepared and really surprised the hell out of all of the other people. I just knew it just because I knew him and I knew that he was a fan of Buddy's. And I will give him this too, is that out of 22 drummers that we had over those 2 weeks, Matt was the only one that after he was finished with his sessions, he had catering come in and do like this whole huge catering setup for the band, for Neal, for me, champagne for everybody. I mean, a class act. So he really was somebody that surprised the hell out of everyone but me because I knew he could do it.
When I think of Guns N' Roses and band members those people idolize, Buddy Rich would not have been the first one to come to mind.
I know, it's interesting, right? And I just had an email sort of back and forth with Slash because we're doing a project and I wanted him to play on it. And again, the people that you think would never be fans of jazz or of Buddy always end up surprising me because they are. So obviously, Buddy influenced every drummer on the planet. So yes, from rock to jazz to funk to R&B, his influence knows no bounds.
I'll be a gopher on that project. I'll go run and get you catering or do whatever I need.
Okay. That sounds like a plan. We could do that.
I'm just so amazed that I know for you, they're just regular people, but when you hear all these names for someone like me or for people listening, it's like jaw-dropping. I don't know how else to describe it.
I've been really fortunate that I've gotten to meet a lot of my heroes. And recently, in the past maybe 5 or 8 years, I've gotten to meet people that I've idolized. I told you earlier that Jesus Christ Superstar, when I first heard the album, and I got to hear Ian Gillan's voice on that album, and then I was immediately a fan of Deep Purple after that. But Ian Gillan came to see us at Ronnie Scott's in London a couple of years ago, and we had Ian Pace as our drumming guest. So he came there to support Ian, the other Ian, and you want to talk about surreal moments. It's like I was in love with Ian Gillan from the time I was 14 years old, and he's standing there, and you're just like, oh my God. And then having him be so gracious, and we sat and we talked, and he came to Chicago and we took him out to dinner and we've become friends now. That to me is completely surreal. And I'm a fan, so I can be a fangirl and fan over somebody, but getting to actually meet these people and become friendly with them, to me, is just a dream.
Oh, I agree. I worked in sports, and when you get a chance to kind of pull down the facade of who the person is on camera and get to kind of learn about them away from the camera, and you realize they're just a normal person, just like I am.
Exactly. Really, celebrities are people that just happen to be a little more well known for something that they've done. But underneath it, you're just sitting there chatting like you would with your best friend. So once you get past looking at somebody and going, oh, that's so-and-so, and oh my God, and this and that, and I'm a fan, and I've been a fan. Once you get past all that, they're just like you and me. Some of them live in castles, though, so it's not like you and me.
Yeah, I definitely don't live in a castle.
I don't live in a castle, but I know a couple of people that do, so that's even cooler.
I've never been invited to a castle either, so I can't say I've done that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting.
When it comes to music, did you play the drums as well or any other instrument?
Oh God, no. Absolutely not. That would never be something that would A, have interest me, or B, would have interest me because it's more interesting that I became a singer because there was no one in my family at that point in time that was a singer. So, but I never had an interest in sitting down behind a set of drums ever. I don't even get how it works. You have to cut your brain into 4 different quadrants and figure out how this goes here and that goes there, and you're doing something else with one hand and something else with one foot. No, my brain doesn't work that way. So I know many drummers, and that's enough for me.
I don't understand how they can get all 4 limbs doing 4 different things at
Something
once.
independently, I don't either, and I don't want to know.
Your son is a drummer as well, too, right?
He is indeed, yes. We have nothing but talent in the family. So he started playing when he was a toddler. Another one that Remo, who is, for those who don't know, Remo has probably the #1 drumhead company in the world. And when Nick was born, Remo sent him a little tiny kit, full drum set with little cymbals and whatever. And we put it in his nursery. And then as he sort of became a little older and was able to walk, and he would sit down and just play. And it was really odd because he just had that thing by osmosis, I guess, because he never took a lesson and never really formally was trained. But he's a great drummer. That's all I can say. He's a producer. He plays every instrument. He sings. He does a lot.
He's like your dad in the fact that he never really took music lessons. It was all, I guess you would say, by ear.
I guess so. That's how it seems to work. It's in the blood. So it kind of trickles down. My dad had this incredible photographic memory where he didn't read music, but he could hear a piece of music and instantaneously get up and play it. He would just know by hearing it where the hits were, where the cuts were, the accents were. And if he got a new piece of music, he would have one of the trumpet players just sit and play time. And then he would just sit in the audience and listen one time through and then get up and play it like he'd been playing it for a year. That's part of his genius, that he was able to have ears like that where he just knew what was coming next.
Yeah, I have a tin ear. I can't do that.
I have a photographic memory, but it's for directions, which is really strange. If I've been someplace once, I know how to get back there. So every city I go to, I sort of know my way around in an odd way, just because I know it. It hit me on a different wavelength.
As a touring musician, I would imagine that comes in pretty handy.
It really does. And especially if I'm with people that have never been to that city before, I'm like, oh, well, that's right up the road. And you go down here and you turn left, and it's odd.
In the US, what's the city when you go out on tour to that you really look forward to? You're like, I can't wait to get back there.
London is really the spot for me. In the US, it would probably be New York because I grew up there and I love going back to New York. But in Europe, it would have to be London. And we love playing in Japan, so we've been in Tokyo, both amazing cities. But I kind of grew up in London, and going back there now, we've been there 4 times in the past 12 months. So that's a lot. We're going back in June again to play at Ronnie Scott's for a week. That's the city I really look forward to going to.
What really draws you to London?
Any place that you spent a lot of time in your childhood, you have a special feeling for that place. I have the same feeling when I go to Disneyland because I spent my childhood in Disneyland because my dad played there every year. So even now as an adult, I go to Disneyland probably 4 or 6 times a year because it gives me that feeling of my dad was there, and you walk around and you're like, oh, I went here with that person and I was here with that person. It's kind of the same with London, although London has changed a lot over the years. But I think it's any place that you were with your parents or you have a great feeling about it from an early age. I think you try to reconnect with that feeling. And I get that in London because of so many places that I went there. A, with my parents, B, with my dad. It was kind of like the last bastion of civility. Back in the day, everyone dressed and you went out and things were special. I don't find that there's a lot of specialness in the world right now.
I would agree to an extent with that, although I would say it's more about the people you're with, I think, to make it special than it is about the event.
Yes, and I've been fortunate when I go there, I'm always with people that I love and that are there with me, for me. But there's also, oh, it wasn't like that the last time I was there, or this wasn't there the last time I was here, or they never let people in flip-flops when I was here the last time, or why are people wearing shorts at the Ritz? It's kind of like that. More so than the people I'm with. It's like you kind of look around and the timbre of things has changed.
Yeah, I might be one of those people wearing shorts in the Ritz. I might be guilty of that.
Okay, then I'm going to have to smack you.
I'm not known for my love of fancy places.
Okay, but that's why London is so cool, because there's a plethora of fancy places that you can go to. And I really like that. Not every day, but I like the pomp and circumstance of things where you can get dressed up and you go, and that's a whole different thing. I mean, I can go and sit in the park and eat on the ground too, but sometimes I really like fancy.
I imagine you probably like Vegas then.
Vegas used to be fancy. Again, over time, Vegas has also changed dramatically. I mean, I grew up there as well. I moved to Vegas when I was 8 years old, and my dad was playing with Harry James at the time. That was weird. We had been living in Miami, and to go to this little thing in the middle of the desert, to me, was just crazy. And over time, Vegas has become a metropolis. And it used to be a small town where everybody knew everybody. And yes, there was the strip and there were hotels, but nothing like what it is today. I can go back there and still kind of get the small town vibe because I always go back to my schools and I always go back to my old house. But Vegas, of all the cities that I've been to, has probably changed the most dramatically.
With Vegas, what was it like to be there so young in a place that very much was and still is, I would say, an adult type city?
Vegas in the day was fun. And the people that I grew up with there are still my best friends. From 8 years old to now, we're all still exactly the same. We all still hang out. It's pretty crazy. But Vegas, being such a small town at the time, was really easy to navigate. So because my dad played in all the hotels, I got to know all the people that ran the showrooms. So by the time I was 14, I was like in and out of every showroom because everybody knew me. So I got to sit in the light booth and watch every show. So that to me was fantastic because I always loved, as you probably can tell by talking to me, being behind the scenes and seeing all these incredible performers and shows was amazing. And we would just run across the street, which was the strip at the time, and you just run back and forth from hotel to hotel and see whatever show you wanted. So that was pretty fun.
Was there a night where, let's say, you saw 3, 4 acts that you remember specifically that you say that's one of the greatest nights I've ever seen?
Everybody that ever played in Vegas, I got to see, from Donnie and Marie, which was another surprise because obviously it's Donnie and Marie. But who knew that their show was so great? I mean, that would not have been a show that I myself would have decided, yeah, I'm going to go see Donnie and Marie. But I got invited. Once I knew that I was going, there was a photograph of my dad wearing a Donny Osmond button on his jacket when he was playing in London because the Osmonds had come to England and like took over the country. And it was at the same time that my dad was touring there. I think I was about 15. So Buddy got a button and it was photographed quite a bit. So when I went to see Donnie and Marie, Marie was already gone, but I got to talk to Donnie afterwards. And I showed him this picture of Buddy wearing the Donny Osmond button. And he went completely insane. He's like, I can't believe that Buddy Rich even knew who I was. And I said, well, beyond that, here's some photos to show you exactly what he thought. So that was something that was very surprising to me. There's always surprises of people that you have sort of a preconceived notion about. And then you go and actually see them, and it far exceeds everything. And they were great, put on a great show.
My music net was pretty wide for this, but Donnie and Marie was not something I thought we were going to talk about.
See, it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other because I can appreciate everything. I don't necessarily love everything, but I can certainly appreciate anything that's good. And they're both very talented and they put on a great show. And it was entertaining. So that's really what you want when you go and see something, is that it exceeds your expectations. And they definitely did.
I didn't follow up on this when you mentioned, and we've been talking about London, did you
Yes,
get a chance to perform with Phil Collins in Great Britain?
I did not. Phil came and did my Buddy Rich Memorial concert. And it's funny because I had been asking him literally for 10 years because he would be in the press talking about Buddy and how Buddy was his main influence and he loved him and this and that. So I finally wrote to him and I said, look, all you do is talk about him in interviews. When are you going to come and do the memorial concert? And he wrote me back. He goes, this is the year. It was amazing because that was the one person that was really hard to get. And it was really only because of his touring schedules. And when we were doing the shows, it kind of never aligned. He was on the road or doing something. But this particular year, the stars aligned and he came and did it. And he just wanted to play drums. And I kind of forced him. I'm like, you have got to sing something. I said, there's no way I'm letting you out of here without singing. So he did. And it was great. And he sang The Way You Look Tonight. I was literally in tears because A, it's watching a dream come true of having him come and do your show, and then B, having him sing this incredible song. And that was one of those moments where you go, all that work and all of the angst that you go through to put shows on, there are moments when it's so worth it.
That is just amazing.
When you start to click back and think about all the people that have come and done these shows, it's pretty amazing. But I don't really think about that. But now that we're talking about it, it's like, yes, I've had some unbelievable people that have graced a stage in Buddy's honor, which is amazing.
Is there a performer out there that hasn't done a memorial show that you say, I would like to get?
There's probably a couple. Stuart Copeland has never done one, and I love his playing. And as a matter of fact, we were just emailing back and forth the other day, and I'm like, you really have to at this point. So again, it's surprising how when you pitch that to people, they're very intimidated. Not that Stuart is, but I think he is. But I've seen people throwing up before they've had to go on the memorial concerts. They're throwing up in the wings. And these are people, you play in front of 100,000 people. This should be easy, but it's not like that to them. Because if Buddy has been such an influence in your life, and you're going out there to pay homage to him, you obviously want it to be the best. And again, it's intimidating. And I don't realize it because I'm sort of in the middle of it. But looking back on how people have gotten so nervous about it, it's interesting because these are people that you would never think would be nervous about anything.
I promised a friend of mine I would ask this, and I don't know. I've looked and I couldn't find it. Has Dave Grohl ever worked with you?
No. And here's another one. You were asking me who, and Dave would definitely be somebody that I would love to collaborate with because he kind of goes beyond the drumming realm, which I think is great. And I think he would really be fantastic.
He has the personality. I think that would be great for a show like what you do.
Yeah, I think so too. Phil and Neal were kind of the ones that people said you're never going to get them to do it. And I did. So I think the people that I haven't had, when we decide to do another one, I think that it would be a surprise. We get people that would be more surprising to do it this time.
When Neal passed, how much did that hurt?
Oh my gosh. When he first got sick, he unfortunately passed from the same thing that my father passed away from, which was a brain tumor. And we had gone to visit him because every time I was in LA, we'd have lunch or we would meet up or do something where we would see each other. And the last time that I went to meet up with him, he just was different. And we did our thing. We chatted, had lunch, whatever it was. And then I left and I called him from the car and I said, okay, what's going on? And he said, can you come back? So I came back. And then he proceeded to tell me that he had been diagnosed with this horrible thing that you don't survive. So then it got real. Then we could sit and cry and talk and really get down to it. And he lasted for quite a while, almost 3 years. And normally it takes you out pretty fast. But luckily, or I don't know, because as you go with these things, everything diminishes and you don't end up real great. But when he passed, obviously it was a shock. And I mean, he was my son's godfather, and it's still shocking to this day.
I can somewhat relate to this because I lost my mom to cancer and my grandfather to cancer as well. So I can relate to this. And as the time gets close, you just realize that it's just not the same person. And in a strange way, you kind of mourn them while they're still alive, if that's possible.
Sure. I mean, if there's a long illness, yes, because you don't want people to suffer. You don't want people to diminish in their capacity of enjoying life. And when my dad was diagnosed, it was 6 weeks from beginning to end. So he did not want to hang around and become less. And that's what he said. I don't ever want to be less than what I've always been. So he made it go quickly.
In terms of your dad being diagnosed, how much of a shock was it initially?
Shocking, obviously, but there was never a moment when I thought he wasn't going to live. I don't know what that is, that hope thing, but there was never a second where I thought, oh, this is going to end badly. Even though, the doctor, I was friendly with his neurologist, and he would sort of give me the lowdown, and I'd be like, nope, he's going to be the one that survives this because he's been through so much. He's survived so many things and illnesses and heart attacks, and he always bounced back. So I always held out that hope that he was going to bounce back from this one, but not so lucky in this time.
I always say when somebody passes away or any kind of trauma involved that there's somebody who comes out of the woodwork who you don't expect to be really reliable. Who was that for you?
There were several, actually. Obviously, Frank Sinatra, who was nothing but incredible and supportive and just there. Johnny Carson was another one who came to the hospital almost every day to visit him. Quincy Jones was a frequent visitor and caller because Quincy had had a brain tumor himself, but he was okay after an operation. Quincy was great. I mean, he called Buddy every day, which was so amazing. But there were a bunch of people like that who Buddy was friends with, but not necessarily people that you saw all the time or whatever. Those people that really were there for him and just calling every day and just making sure my mom and I were okay.
You mentioned Johnny Carson, and even though I wasn't old enough to see most of the performances when they aired, I've seen many of them in syndication. What's your favorite story with Johnny, either involving or not involving your dad?
Johnny and my dad were literal best friends. I mean, they were not just showbiz friends. My dad didn't hang out with a lot of showbiz people. He wasn't a cocktail party guy. He wasn't a party guy. So he and Johnny would go to dinner. They'd hang out at their homes. So what you saw on the Carson show between the two of them was real. That kind of chemistry you can't really fake. So they were really, really tight friends. And Johnny told me that there were only 2 times that he didn't do the show. And that was when his son died and when Buddy died. And he said he just couldn't go on. He couldn't do the show. So that kind of shows you how close they were. And he also delivered the eulogy at Buddy's funeral and was really there for us after the fact as well. But stories, there's many. There are so many stories about the two of them being out to dinners and things that would go on at those dinners. Johnny liked to drink wine, and my dad was not a drinker at all. He'd have a glass of wine, and that would put him out. So they were at dinner at a place on Sunset in LA, and it was an Italian restaurant. My dad ordered spaghetti. Johnny ordered whatever, and Johnny was like continuing on with the wine from the afternoon. So Johnny had a capacity for drinking that Buddy did not have. And at some point, the waiter brought the food, and Buddy literally passed out in the pasta, put his head in, and that was it. So it just so happened that a friend of ours was in the restaurant at the time, sitting at another table, and had walked up to the table where my dad was at the moment right before the head went down into the pasta. And she's like, Buddy, it's so-and-so. And my dad kind of looked up at her and she looked at Johnny and goes, he's going to die when he knows that it's me. And at that moment, when she said that, his face went into the pasta and Johnny goes, my God, he really was surprised to see you. So it was one of those crazy moments. Johnny had the waiter come remove the plate from underneath him and put him in a limo and sent him home. So there you go. There's one.
I know Johnny had a capacity for drinking many people under the table, even including Ed McMahon.
There were many a night when they would come and hear the band in a club just plastered. I mean, it was hilarious. But yes, they had quite the capacity.
Johnny would play the drums a little bit too. Would they ever play together?
Never played together, but my dad had given Johnny a set that was in his living room. At every home that he lived in. It was front and center, in the middle of the house, in the middle of the living room, and he would just play.
That would be a pretty good piece of memorabilia. So let me ask you, what's your favorite piece of memorabilia that you have from your dad's career?
Wow. I have in my closet 3 things, actually. That would be my favorite things. 2 suit jackets that he wore that I keep, that I've had since then, that are just in my closet with the rest of my clothes that I just look at from time to time. And then one is a t-shirt that he wore a lot, which was a New York Yankees shirt, being an avid Yankee fan, that he used to wear around the house a lot. So those 3 items are probably the ones that mean the most to me.
Did you grow up at all as a sports fan, or was it all about music?
I was a big sports fan. I'm still a Yankee fan. Living in New York, you're either a Met or a Yankee fan. Buddy was both. So all the New York teams, I mean, I got to see the Rangers, I got to see the Knicks, I got to see the Yankees. So that was always great. Since I've moved to Chicago, I would probably be more of a White Sox fan.
If you live on the North Side and you're a White Sox fan, I'm not sure that's legal.
It's not legal, and it really pisses people off. So I'm proud of my fandom of the White Sox. But as far as really being into sports, not so much.
I would imagine you just didn't have the time to do it just with music, and we haven't really talked about your modeling career as well. The time just wasn't there.
I would make time to go to watch the Yankees a lot because Buddy was such a fan of that and knew a lot of the players. So that was fun. I don't know if people know this, but Ron Guidry, who was one of the pitchers for the Yankees, was also a drummer. He actually had a drum set, and Buddy and Gator, which was his baseball name, would play together in the dugout. So that's pretty crazy.
Didn't have Louisiana Lightning on my bingo card.
So there you go.
I know a lot of things about Guidry, but somehow I didn't know that he was a fan of the drums.
You have a new wrinkle in your brain right now.
I have some Yankees fans who listen to this who are really going to like hearing that.
Oh, good. Yes, go Yankees, and they're doing pretty well so far.
Since I know you have to go in the not too distant future, we haven't talked a lot about 2 things, and the first one is your modeling career. You modeled with Wilhelmina. What was that like to be a model?
That was interesting. I never had that mentality. I always wanted to do more because I never was a person to just stand there and take my picture. I was into acting. I was into singing. So modeling to me was very short-lived. I wasn't a fan of doing that. So I did like going on auditions. I did like going and doing commercials and things like that. But as far as just standing there and having someone take my picture, I was not into it that much. But it was fun running around New York City and being with other girls that were just starting out. And Patty Hansen and I actually started on the same day. She's married to Keith Richards now. And Connie Selica, which is really kind of odd.
Wow, that's a threesome. That's just amazing.
They sent us all out at the same time in one taxi to go on auditions. But it was just an amazing time in New York. That was really when New York was flying. And it was fun. And I really enjoyed that time in the city. It was really great.
Do you still talk to Connie as well?
I do not. I don't think I ever saw her after that day. So Patty I used to run into every now and then. We had the same dentist in New York, and we used to run into each other there. And then she And Keith, actually, when we were doing Burning for Buddy, they actually showed up in the studio, which was really wild. I haven't seen her in years.
One thing I want to make sure I get in, because we haven't talked anything, is about your mom. How important was your
Yes.
mom in your life?
My mom and I were like the dynamic duo because Buddy was always gone. So she and I would be home a lot alone together. She really raised me single-handedly because he traveled so much. She put up with a lot. She didn't love to travel, so she was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, and I wouldn't be the person I am without her. She was great. I really miss her.
You've told so many stories about your dad. Is there one you'd like to share about your mom?
I don't know if you know this. My mom was actually dating Gene Krupa when she met my dad. Now, for your listeners that don't know who Gene Krupa is, go and YouTube it or Google it or whatever you do. But at the time, Gene Krupa was a huge drumming icon and really was the man who brought drums to the forefront because he was very dramatic and he played with Benny Goodman and he was very handsome, looked like a movie star. And at the time, my dad and Gene were doing a series of concerts called Jazz at the Philharmonic. And Jazz at the Philharmonic was coming through Los Angeles, which is where my mother was living. And she was under contract to Howard Hughes and RKO Studios. And she was an actress and a dancer and a Copa girl. So as they were coming through LA, Gene said to my dad, "I'd really like you to meet Marie. She's a great girl." And at the time, though, Gene was married, and my mother was not real happy about that. So when they were coming to LA, Gene asked my dad to take my mom out to dinner. But he's like, "Okay, I'll take her out to dinner." And my mother was like, "What? You're pawning me off on somebody else? What kind of person are you?" So he's like, "No, no, no, you're going to love him. He's a great kid." And he said, "Just don't fall in love with him." So, of course, they meet, they go out on their one and only date, and he proposes to her on their first date. And 6 months later, they were married.
Wow.
Love at first sight is a real thing. So yes, that's a good Marie story. There are tons of them. She was dating Howard Hughes, which in itself is just insane if you think about it. And Howard had asked her to marry him, and she said, "You're an old man." And he was, I think, 33 or something at the time, and she was like 22. And she's like, "Oh no, he's an old man." So he would drive her, pick her up, fly her, because he owned TWA at the time. He'd fly her around the country on TWA, and she would turn in the tickets to go visit Gene Krupa. So I don't think Howard was too happy about that. But I mean, these stories go on for days. I could sit with you for hours and tell you stories.
And I would sit and listen because I love hearing
Yeah,
these stories.
there's so many, so many. But I will be writing a book.
There you go. You can self-publish on Amazon. Do what I did.
There you go. Exactly.
Is there a story that you really relish?
That's a whole lifetime's worth of stories. I mean, we were literally together all the time, the whole time of me growing up. And the things that she had to put up with me, with going to see bands and wanting to go to airports to meet bands. I mean, I was a fan of bands. I was a rocker from sort of day one, and how I ended up now having a jazz band is kind of interesting. But I do it because my dad asked me to. So that's the whole gist of why we do what we do now, and having the Buddy Rich Band on the road is because that's what he asked. But going back to my mom, we were together so much that every day was a story. So I can't pick out just one or two because every day was something, because she really was my one parent that was home all the time. But we got along great. She left us like 3.5 years ago. And it's a big hole in my life because she was something else. There was nobody like my mother. Nobody.
That's always good to hear because not every musician has a great relationship with their parents, and you have a phenomenal one with both.
I was really, really, really blessed to have the parents that I had. Supportive and there for you. You hear women speak about the glass ceiling and not being able to do what a man does. But I had a dad who told me there was nothing I couldn't do. no matter what it was. If I wanted to be a jet pilot, if I wanted to be a gardener, if I wanted to be a florist, whatever it was that I wanted to do, he said, just be the best at it. Study, do whatever it is, and be the best at it. So I was never told that there was something I couldn't do. And I think that's lost today because you can't do this and you can't do that because you're a girl, you're this because you're a girl. I think that's complete BS. The only person that stops you from doing something is yourself. I think you can do whatever you want to do.
And lastly, the band is out on tour. Where are you heading up next, and who might we see performing with the band?
Actually, we're heading to London in about 8 weeks. We're going back to Ronnie Scott's for a week. The drummer in the band is Greg Potter, and Greg is a phenomenal musician. And imagine stepping into that situation where the world's greatest has now left and you're now going to take over and be the drummer in this band. So yes, we have been through a lot of ups and downs with obviously the internet, with people, with why him, why not him, why this, why that, why not this guy, why not that guy. And that's not how we think about it. We think about it as who is the best man for the job? And he is. So all the noise that you hear, well, it's not Buddy. It's never going to be Buddy. Buddy was one of a kind. He's Rembrandt. He's Mozart. You're never going to get another one. So that doesn't mean that his music shouldn't still be heard or shouldn't still live on. And if we didn't get the kind of response that we get from audiences, we probably wouldn't do it. But people are so excited to hear that music still, and to be able to walk into a place, be it a theater or a nightclub, and see those music stands and see that White Marine Pearl drum set and hear those charts, it's something. We get people to say, the last time I was in this place, I saw Buddy, and the stage looks exactly the same. And that's what we want to do. No one's ever going to replicate what Buddy did. So what we're going to do is give you an evening of his music brought to you in the way that I know he would have wanted you to have it. So we've been very fortunate in that it's been accepted and we have been asked to come back every year. So I guess that's a good thing. And the naysayers can go pound sand.
I love that they can go pound sand. How great is that?
I was going to say something else, but I didn't want to be rude.
It's probably a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. But we're on the road a lot, but we get to do what we love a lot. So it makes it all worthwhile. And I'm doing it for the greatest reason, that I'm keeping my father's legacy alive, because he would have done it for me.
Cathy, I want to thank you so much for coming on the I Play Too podcast today and talking about your time in music, all the stories with Frank Sinatra, Johnny Carson. Best of luck going to London, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. It was a pleasure. I love talking to you.